Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to be looking at first level magic user spells in Unearthed Arcana. So as we can see in the list, there are 40, count them, 40 first level spells listed, out of which 10 are new, and those are the ones we're going to be looking at. And the first spell is Alarm. It has a duration of 2 to 8 turns, plus 1 turn per level. The area of effect is up to 20 square feet per level, and it has a casting time of 1 round. When an alarm spell is cast, the magic user causes a selected area to react to the presence of any living creature larger than a normal rat, i.e. anything larger than about 1/2 cubic foot in volume or more than about 3 pounds in weight. The area of effect can be a portal, a section of floor, stairs, etc. As soon as any living creature sets foot upon the area, touches it, or otherwise contacts it, the alarm spell will evoke a loud ringing which will be clearly heard within a 60-foot radius. Reduce the radius by 10 feet for interposing doors, by 20 feet for substantial interposing walls. The sound will last for 1 segment and then cease. While undead creatures will not cause the spell to function, invisible creatures, as well as those from other planes who are otherwise alive, will do so. Ethereal or astrally projected creatures will not trigger an alarm, but flying and levitating creatures will. The material component of this spell are a tiny bell and a piece of very fine silver wire. So this is one of those spells that you wonder why it didn't exist before. It is a magical replacement for some very mundane means of creating a warning that an intruder is there. But it does have quite a few advantages over any kind of physical snare that would alert someone. Now, one thing is that 20 square feet is not that big an area. It's much smaller than most people assume. It's only 4 by 5 feet. At low levels, casters will want to be very strategic as to where they cast it to ensure that intruders will trigger the alarm. The limitations mean that it's not totally a game changer. You still have to watch out for undead and for some other creatures. The fact that the creatures have to be alive, it's not mentioned here, but I would certainly rule that a golem or other mechanical type construct would not trigger this alarm. Another way to circumvent this spell, if all you want to do is obtain an object protected by it, would be by the simple expedient of using an unseen servant. I do like this spell. It is one way to get around the fact that you may not have a ranger or thief in your party. At least that's one of the advantages of having one of those classes in your party. They can set snares to warn you of any intruders. This is more limited in a way, but is also more powerful. The duration itself is fairly short. You can't trust this alarm to last you overnight, at least not until you reach very high levels, but you're guaranteed at least half an hour. You can get up to an hour and a half, perhaps more at higher levels. I would also consider using this sound to cause chaos if I'm infiltrating an enemy dungeon. You cast it and then leave the area, and then as you're exploring and trying to get to your objective, all of a sudden this loud ringing comes up out of nowhere, apparently. People will want to go and investigate it. Meanwhile, they're not going to where you are. There are some other uses than just setting it up before taking a rest. In fact, I would argue that the relatively short duration means it's not really meant as something you want to use to warn you while you're sleeping that something is coming. The next spell is Armor. It has an area of effect of a single creature, and a casting time of 1 round. By means of this spell, the caster creates a magical field of force which serves as if it were letter armor, AC 8. If the spell is cast upon a person already armored, it has no effect. However, if it is cast upon a creature with an armor class normally better than 9, due to its size, speed, skin, etc., it will benefit the normal armor class by 1 step, i.e. AC 8 becomes 7, AC 7 becomes 6, and so on. The magic armor spell does not slow or hinder movement, adds no weight or encumbrance, nor does it prevent spellcasting. It lasts until dispelled or until the wearer sustains cumulative damage totaling greater than 8 points plus 1 per level of the caster. Thus, the wearer might take 8 points from an attack, then several turns later sustain an additional point of damage. Unless the spell were cast by a magic user of 2nd level or higher, it would be dispelled at this time. Until it is dispelled, the armor spell allows the wearer full benefits of the armor class gained due to the Dwemer. Note, this spell will not function in conjunction with protective magic devices other than a ring of protection. The material component is a piece of finely cured leather which has been blessed by a cleric. Another spell that is quite useful. It can last a very long time. In fact, at low levels, if the caster has cast it on him or herself, it is likely to last until the caster's death. Since magic users start with 1d4 points of damage, the average magic user is unlikely to have more hit points than the armor will take until they reach 4th, maybe even 5th level. I think a lot of the rules lawyer type players will argue that they can cast this spell on themselves one day, then memorize another spell the following day, thus benefiting from it while still having access to a 1st level spell. This may not seem too critical at high levels, but certainly at low levels could make all the difference. It could mean having a spell rather than none. I quite like this spell. It just reduces the chances of getting hit, which are fairly high for the average magic user. Let's be honest, it's mostly going to be cast on a magic user, or maybe a monk could benefit from this. Although in many cases, as far as they're concerned, it would only improve their AC by 1. In fact, any dexterous magic user will only increase their AC by 1 with this spell. That 5% chance might mean the difference between a killing blow and surviving a battle. The next spell is Fire Water. It has a duration of 1 round. The area of effect is a pint of water per level of the caster, and it has a casting time of 1 segment. By means of this spell, the magic user changes the volume of water to a volatile, flammable substance similar to alcohol and likewise lighter than water. If this substance is exposed to flame, fire, or even a spark, it will burst into flames and burn with a hot fire. Each creature subject to fire, water, flame will suffer 2 to 12 hit points of damage. The fire water created will evaporate and be useless within 1 round, even if it is securely contained and sealed, so it must be utilized, ignited, within 10 segments of its creation. The material components of this spell are a few grains of sugar and a raisin. I would certainly never memorize this spell, even if I had access to it. It's not worth the slot, and it's so limited. At least with a flask of oil, as long as I have it, I can just light it up and toss it. The only advantage the Firewater has is that since it only requires a spark to light up, unlike oil, which needs an actual flame, you could argue for those games where you have to roll to light a fire, it's not needed for Firewater. But again, I don't think this spell is worth it. It mentioned that the substance is lighter than water, sort of like alcohol. Alcohol is quite miscible with water and doesn't tend to rise to the top like cream. Would the fire water float to the top? That would be for the DM to decide. The fact that the range is only 1 inch means you can't cast this at a large distance and have people maybe think they're using water, but it's the fire water and it'll make a fire that's already there worse. So yeah, this spell is quite disappointing overall. Next is Grease. It has a permanent duration. The area of effect is a square foot per level of the caster, and it has a casting time of 1 segment. A grease spell creates an area covered by a slippery substance of a fatty, greasy nature. Any creature stepping upon this area will have to save versus petrification or slip, skid, and fall. Of course, if a creature is aware of the area, it can possibly be avoided. The spell can also be used to cause a greasy coating on some surface other than that underfoot. A rope, ladder rungs, weapon handle, etc. Lone material objects will always be subject to such a spell use, but if the magic is cast upon an object being wielded or employed by a creature, The creature must fail a saving throw versus spell for the grease spell to be effective. A single saving throw will negate the effects. The material component of the spell is a bit of pork rind, butter, or other greasy material. This can be a fun spell. It's still around today as far as I know. The area of effect is quite small, so you do have to use it quite strategically. The range is relatively short, so you're probably going to be really close to melee range if you're thinking of using this in combat to cause someone to slip. It can make certain areas harder to access to delay pursuit. Sometimes it's worth spending a round to delay your pursuers some more. These are the obvious uses. On the other hand, it might be just as easy to grab a bit of that oil from my flask, pour it on those ladder rungs, make it harder to climb. Again, a spell that can be replaced by a bit of planning and the right mundane items, but one that can also allow you to do things that those mundane items will not allow you to do. For example, using it in combat. I'm of two minds about this one. It has some potential, but I'm not sure that it's worth a spell slot as it stands, especially at low levels. The following spell is Melt. It has a duration of 1 round per level. The area of effect is a cubic yard of ice or 2 cubic yards of snow per level of caster, and a casting time is 1 segment. When a melt spell is cast, the magic user effectively raises the temperature in the area of effect. The sudden increase in warmth will melt ice in 1 round, so that a first level magic user can melt a cube of solid ice 1 yard on a side in 1 round after the spell is cast, so that the ice becomes water. Twice this volume of snow can be affected, so that the spell will melt 1 cubic yard of snow in half a round, or will turn 2 cubic yards, 1 yard by 1 yard by 2 yards, of snow to water in 1 round. Against such monsters as white dragons, winter wolves, yeti, woolly rhinos, those composed of para-elemental ice, and the like, a melt spell will inflict 2 points of damage per level of the spellcaster, or 1 point per level if the subject creature makes its saving throw versus spell. The melt spell is generally ineffective against types of creatures other than those enumerated above. The material component for a melt spell are a few crystals or rock salt and a pinch of soot. So this is a fun spell. I think a creative player can do quite a bit with this. Clearly this spell is more useful either in the winter season or in an Arctic setting of some sort. I'm not fully convinced that things like woolly rhinos should suffer damage from the heat involved. If they do, then why wouldn't a regular rhino, or any other animal for that matter? I'm fine with those para-elemental creatures or other magical creatures associated with cold. I'd even be willing to grant that the white dragons could suffer damage. On the other hand, since it creates a lot of heat, can you argue that a cone of cold or the white dragon's breath could be offset somehow by this spell if you were to cast it on a person? But then since the duration is quite short, you'd have to know what's happening, and this would have to be done at the right time. And of course, the area of effect being quite limited means you probably would not be able to protect the whole party, especially if they're scattered around, which smart parties will be if they're facing a dragon or a magic user that can affect a large area with their spells or breath weapons. I like this spell. It has a lot of interesting potential uses, both in combat and out of combat. The next spell is Mount. It has a duration of 12 turns plus 6 turns per level. It will affect 1 creature, and the casting time is 1 round. By means of this spell, the caster calls a normal animal to serve him or her as a mount. The animal will serve willingly and well, but at the expiration of the spell duration, it will disappear, returning to its own place. The type of mount gained by this spell depends on the level of the caster. Of course, a caster of sufficiently high level to qualify for a camel, for instance, can choose a lower level mount if he or she so desires. Available mounts are these: 1st through 3rd level, a mule or light horse; 4th through 7th level, a draft horse or war horse; 8th through 12th level, a camel, 13th level and up, an elephant, and Huda at 18th level. The mount will not come with any riding gear unless it is of a class lower than the caster would normally be entitled to gain, i.e. a 4th level magic user can gain a warhorse without saddle and harness, or a light horse with saddle and harness. The statistics of the animal gained are typical of all creatures of the same class. The material component of the spell is a bit of hair or dung from the type of animal to be conjured. That can be quite a useful spell. One of the things that's important is that the animal is to serve the caster as a mount. So you can't call it up and then have someone else ride it while you stay and they go away on the mount. That said, if you get a draft horse and you already have a wagon, I would allow for multiple people to ride the wagon, of course. I would also allow multiple people to ride the elephant at high levels. You might want to argue that if you're 2 levels higher, instead of just the saddle and harness, you could get a small wagon for the mule, or for the draft horse, a larger wagon that others can ride in too. This spell is not meant to allow for extensive travel. It's to answer an urgent need to move fast. The other thing is this is a conjuration / summoning spell, which always strikes up the debate. Does this animal come from somewhere? Does it appear by magic having been teleported here? If so, where does it come from? What's the effect? Or does it actually have to make its way to the magic user? In which case, obviously, you can't cast this spell somewhere where those animals are not nearby, or they can't access where you are at all. It's a fairly good spell, though I do wonder what the use of a war horse is if you're not a fighter. Next is Precipitation. It has a range of 1 inch per level, a duration of 1 segment per level, a casting time of 1 segment. The area of effect is a 3-inch diameter cylinder up to 12 inches high. This spell is identical to the 1st level clerical spell of the same name, except that a holy symbol is not part of the material component. So I've already discussed this spell. I'm not going to do so again, but I will link to the video with that up in the corner. Next is Run. It has a range of touch, a duration of 5 to 8 hours, and a casting time of 1 round. The Run spell enables the recipient to run at full speed, twice the normal walking speed, for 5 to 8 hours without tiring. However, after so running, the individual must spend a like number of hours resting, as well as drinking plenty of liquids and eating heartily. For every 2 levels of experience of the spellcaster, another individual can be affected, i.e. at 4th level, 2 individuals can be touched and empowered to run, at 6th level, 3 individuals, etc. Only humans and demi-humans in their natural forms are affected by this spell, and barbarians having the special running ability of that class are immune to the spell's effects. The material components of this spell is an elixir made of the juice of dried plums boiled in spring water and the oil of 5 to 8 beans of a spurge, castor plant. So this is going to be another good spell if you need fast movement. Will last longer than the mount though, which can be good. But there is a price for the recipient to pay afterwards, in that I would personally rule that the rest is complete. You would be considered having some exhaustion and not at full power after the run. Of course, if the individual doesn't run for the full duration, I would allow for a shorter rest time. So if you only need to run for 1 or 2 hours without tiring, which is still quite a good distance, I would rule that if you don't run for the entire duration of the spell, then you don't need 5 to 8 hours to rest. You just need a duration equivalent to the amount of time you were running. Another good spell for 1st level, and that widens the range of what magic users can do. Next is Taunt. It has a strange duration called Instantaneous. It will affect 2 levels or hit dice per level of the caster, and it has a casting time of 1 round. A taunt spell enables the caster to jape and jeer effectively with respect to any creature with an intelligence of 2 or greater. The spell's Dwemer gives the magic user's words and sounds real meaning to the subject creature or creatures. These words and sounds will challenge the subjects, be insulting, and in general cause irritation and anger. If the subject creature or creatures fail to save versus spell, the taunt spell will cause them to rush forth in fury to do battle with the spellcaster, and each and every affected creature so coming will certainly attack the spellcaster if physically capable of doing so, i.e. they will seek to use body weapons and handheld weapons rather than attacking from a distance. Separation by an impenetrable or uncrossable boundary, a wall of flame, a deep chasm, will cause the spell to break. Only one sort of creature can be affected by a single taunt spell. In a mixed group of orcs and goblins, for instance, the caster would be able to affect either the orcs or the goblins, caster's choice, but not both at once. The magic affects creatures closest to the spellcaster first, regardless of maximum range. Thus, if a group of gnolls were being taunted by a 10th level magic user, the nearest 10 creatures would be subject to the spell first, even though the spellcaster might prefer to affect the gnollish shaman at the rear of the group. Troops under a strong leader would gain a saving throw bonus of +1 to +4 at the DM's discretion. Clearly a precursor to some of the more modern bard abilities, I do have to question the wisdom of a magic user with no armor and very little combat ability becoming the target of creatures enraged at his words. On the other hand, the barrier separating the magic user from the creatures has to be uncrossable for the spell to fail. Therefore, some fighters in the way would not be considered uncrossable, so the creatures might actually fight at a disadvantage as they focus on moving forward and past them. It could also be used to bring creatures towards a trapped area of some sort. You need to strategically use this spell in order to really benefit from it. This is a good spell, one that needs to be used very carefully by the magic user in question if he doesn't want to be swarmed by angry orcs. And finally, we have Wizard Mark, which has a permanent duration, an area of 1 square foot, and a casting time of 1 segment. When the spell is cast, the magic user is able to inscribe, visibly or invisibly, his or her personal rune or mark, as well as up to 6 additional characters of smaller size. A wizard mark spell allows the caster to etch the rune upon stone, metal, or any softer substance without harm to the material upon which the mark is placed. If an invisible mark is made, detect magic will cause it to glow and be readable, which does not necessarily imply understandability. Detect invisibility, true seeing, true sight, a gem of seeing, or a robe of eyes will likewise note an invisible wizard mark. A read magic spell will reveal the maker's intent, and an erase spell will wipe clean a wizard marked surface. The material components for the casting of this spell are a pinch of diamond dust, about 50 gold pieces worth, and a pigment or pigments for the coloration of the mark. If the mark is to be invisible, the pigments are still needed, but the caster uses a stylus of some sort rather than his or her digit. I've always wondered what exactly the use of this is. You could arguably use it to identify your personal property. The 6 characters do limit what you can say. It's also not clear what the personal mark of a wizard is. Is it like a signature? Is it something that is individual to every magic user, and magic users learn the marks of famous wizards from the past? I'm not sure why I would want to use this spell. The only thing I can consider is writing a short invisible message. Assuming your wizard is called Kilroy, you can't even write Kilroy was here, since that requires 7 letters in addition to the wizard's name, mark. 6 characters in a language that uses an alphabet like English is very, very limiting. On the other hand, if you were to be writing Chinese or Japanese where one character is an entire word. You could actually have a complete sentence happening here. So it will be up to the dungeon master to decide what kind of writing system is used. All that said, I just can't imagine using this spell. I don't see how it would be useful. So if anyone has a good use for it, please let me know in the comments. And we'll now do a quick recap. Alarm, potentially quite useful, though could be replaced by a skilled thief or ranger. Armor is somewhat useful. I would assume a lot of magic users will benefit from making themselves a little bit harder to hit. Fire water was quite forgettable as far as I'm concerned, not all that useful. Having a flask of oil handy will replace it and be just as useful, if not more. Grease has certainly become a mainstay. Has to be used quite strategically, but has a lot of potential. Same thing with melt, though I disagree with the creatures it can cause damage to. I would limit it to creatures that are magically imbued with cold and ice, but not Arctic type creatures. Like, I think the woolly rhino is out of place there. Mount is a good utility spell. Precipitation we've gone over. Run is another one that's a fairly good utility spell and has some good limitations to make up for its quite extensive duration. Taunt is to be used carefully by the magic user if he doesn't want to be swarmed with angry opponents, but can be quite effective and devastating if played the right way. And finally, Wizard Mark, I just do not understand what this spell does. It seems to me a cantrip could be more useful. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at first level magic user spells in Unearthed Arcana, and I'll see you next time.